just to give you some sense of perspective, to be at this stage in your training, day 2, where you're still kind of, you're either extremely confused about why everyone's preoccupied with the things that they're preoccupied with. You're either extremely cynical and rolling your eyes, thinking this was great for me to take a week off of vacation to do this. Maybe this is not your vacation. Or you're disinterested and condescending, and you're looking and saying, well, I knew these people didn't know anything, so let's walk on from it. And I want you to know that that's okay to feel any of those things. All that is appropriate and historically consistent with the way people sort of deal with this at first. There is a sense in which it is easy for a discussion that is so preoccupied with a philosophy of ministry that will come across invariably as if this is all a discussion about metaphysics and esoterica. In other words, we're trying to be obscure, we're trying to confuse you, we're trying to be high-minded. You know, Presbyterians are looking for another reason to look down on everybody else, right? That seems to be what they do the best anyway. Nothing sort of screams that more on the face of it than the discussion of presuppositions. Why do Presbyterians use that word all the time? Presupposition. You haven't looked at your presupposition. But I also know that that word can itself be a stumbling block for people because they don't know what it means or where it fits into the larger portion of the philosophy of ministry. Thank you. Now there's a creak. I shouldn't be hearing myself, should I? Is that right? You can hear it come. Oh, there we go. Open. High, close, down. Is that good enough?
Very good. All right. What I need to do, though, to begin with is to basically try to fit the presuppositions into the larger framework of the philosophy of ministry. What are these? What do we conceive of them as? You have a very brief, inadequate outline, I think, on page 1, 2, 3 of your second day, Tuesday outlines. And so I kind of want to do just a little bit of intro there. This goes from 2 to when? When does this wrap up? 4 something or other? 4:30? So 2.5 hours. Okay, we're going to have a long break in between the two of this because the speaker doesn't have that much material on this topic. So we'll just think of something to say. Look, why do we have a conversation about philosophy of ministry? And when RYM uses the word philosophy, how do they mean that? And I hope you'll understand its relevance when we illustrate this. The way in which we've drawn this out historically is that there is inevitably a certain set of beliefs that we find to hold dear. For many of you, you went to seminary and you found truths that you began to build your life upon, that meant something to you, that even were, you would say, transformational to you. They were propositional statements that either came from Scripture or were attempts to summarize Scripture. But those things came home for you. They were important to you. And somewhere along the way, you thought, people should know this. I kind of want people to know this, to embrace these truths. There's a thing out there and we want to get this across. And so, foolishly perhaps, maybe by way of blessing, you took a job doing youth ministry. And someone looked at you and said, well, all right, we would like for you to reach the youth. Okay? And so you sat in maybe an office, maybe a closet, maybe a cubicle, maybe a desk. I don't know, what do you have? Your car. And you thought to yourself, well, it's time to do something. I'm now a youth volunteer. I'm now the youth director. So let's go do something. And you began to do things. Some of you had instincts because you had good experiences when you were in youth group. Others of you were creative and just know how to kind of mix it up with students. You just wanted to hang, find places where you could do that. But the bottom line was, is you started to do something. So the question that RYM is trying to recommend to you or to commend to you as a way of conceiving what you are doing as a youth minister, pastor, volunteer, is answering this question: how will you begin to match up these truths that you came to understand and embrace in the theological things that we live by, and the stuff that you're doing day in and day out for your church? That is, how is it that I bring my beliefs in line with my practices? I hope actually that sounds a little bit familiar, because in some ways it's a fairly decent definition of sanctification. Years ago, we were privileged to have none other than Joe Novenson, the pastor of Lookout Mountain Pres in Chattanooga, Tennessee, to speak at our summer conference at RYM. And he did the entire conference on the doctrine of the church. And it was a fantastic discussion, amazing to see sort of how the high school students responded to it. But what was very interesting to me was an illustration Joe used about what he referred to as the gap. Now, by that, he did not refer to the clothing store that occupies every mall in every corner of America. The gap he described as was the gap that inevitably exists between, on the one hand, the things that Scripture says are true of you as a person in union with Christ, and on the other hand, the way that you actually live. Presumably, there is a gap between what the Bible says is true of you and how you behave in any given day. The struggle for sanctification, to grow in holiness, is the attempt to close that gap between those two truths. Now, we could spend an entire seminar on why I think that's a very profound way to frame the question of sanctification, but that's not our purpose in our discussion here. But something clicked with me when Joe said that, because in some sense, that's a great description of what RYM thinks is the larger task of a youth ministry person. And that is to close the gap between the things which I say that I believe and the ways in which I am potentially contradicting these truths by the way that I act around students. And I'm not talking, when I say the way that I act, about your immaturity, the times in which you let your tongue slip, the time in which you were more of a buddy than you were a mentor to students. I'm not even talking about that, so that's part of the deal. I'm saying for even the activities that you plan out, how can you say, what is helping you say that the practices in which I engage are in keeping with the truths that I embrace? Let me give you another example of this on a small scale. When I was first doing campus ministry, I had been doing youth ministry, as I said before, for about 5, 6, 7, 8 years prior to becoming a campus minister for college students. And we sort of began our ministry at the University of Memphis back in a long time ago. And people began to ask questions about what this was. If you're a new ministry, if you're new on the block, people want to know kind of what makes you tick. And I was having a conversation with a young man who said, this is all very interesting because it seems like RUF doesn't do evangelism. So what is the purpose of RUF? Why are y'all here? Because it clearly isn't evangelism. And I kind of cocked my head a little bit and I said, well, that's really interesting. I said, because I would actually say that that's the only reason that we're here. The only reason why we exist is for the purpose of evangelism. I'll never forget it. It was a good friend of mine, this kid. He goes, huh? Which I perceived in my counseling degree that this person had questions. Huh? Because here's the thing, and again, we could talk a long time about the manner in which the idea of evangelism sort of evolved in my experience and understanding. But let me just give you one example. What I realized the more in talking to this young man was, when he said the word evangelism, he meant something very specific. And that evangelism, that specific activity was, when you get to the end of one's gospel presentation, you give people an opportunity to respond to that presentation. And of course, it usually comes under the guise of every head bowed, all eyes closed, if tonight you would like to pray to receive Christ into your heart, to ask Him to surrender to His Lordship, etc., etc., pray this prayer along with me, or sign this card, or perhaps maybe you should come forward and meet with some of the people here who would love to talk with you about this. In other words, he had a very specific understanding of evangelism, and we tried to build some of that out during the conversation. I said, this is what I found interesting. I said, when I began to study what I thought the Bible said about my condition as a sinner before God, I began to realize that the Bible did not get preoccupied with the freedom of my will to do one thing or the other. As a matter of fact, the more that I studied Scripture, the less I saw of the Bible being preoccupied with the idea of the freedom of my will, my free will being free to choose one or the other. Rather, I saw the Bible being very preoccupied with the ability of my will, my ability to choose. And knowing that since I was someone who was born in sin and given to sin and committed to sin, that, guess what? That leopard can't change his spots. What that leopard is good at doing is sinning. And so therefore, if I was going to present that message to someone, a deeply offensive message, by the way, it might not be the best practice, okay, to present that case to them and then immediately give them something to do in response to that. In other words, what I was grappling with my friend was, it seems that because I've become convinced of this truth about my natural state in sin, that I had to conform the way that I behaved in front of students. Now look, some of you out there being like, oh, what is this? Is this some sort of anti-evangel? Okay, no. My point is not for you to agree with me on the issue of evangelism. That's another seminar for another time. I'm simply making the broader point that when was the last time we considered the way in which the very programming that I put together in a given year can either support my theology or actually even undermine it? The question of how we make certain that we do not contradict the things that we believe with what we do is what we mean by philosophy. Okay? By philosophy, we don't mean, oh, we read some book on Immanuel Kant or Kierkegaard, whoever those people are. First two names that came in my head when I said the word philosopher in my head. We don't mean any of that. That's not the discussion. By philosophy, we're saying, what are the dynamics inherent in ministry activity that will assist us at conforming our practices, what we do, with the things we say we believe? I've said it for years. In many ways, RYM Youth Training the weekend is in many ways an extended exercise in ridding the pastoral ministry of hypocrisy, of behaving in a way that's not consistent with what we said we believe. The dynamics, as we uncover these dynamics, these principles, these presuppositions, these purposes, these drawings, these diagrams, they are all attempts at giving us, of making explicit this connection. Because the arrows must flow in that direction. At RYM, it's absolutely vital to say that your theology leads to your philosophy, which leads to your methodology. If you go in the opposite direction, it means that you are going to begin to believe in the things that just work. Oh, and this is why you're frustrated. Because you're kind of like, are we going to get to like the 10 youth group games that are the awesomest and funnest? Because all this stuff about philosophy, and you used the word esoterica earlier on, and I don't even know what that word is. Truthfully, I don't either. It sounded like a word that meant like what it's supposed to. But can we have something practical? And at RYM, we tend to frustrate people because very early on, especially your first year, it doesn't feel very much like it is. But I want to encourage you to hang with it. Because what we're doing is we're trying to shape some of your fundamental commitments. We're trying to sell you on some of our basic priorities and values in the hopes that you will begin to build out from that value a youth ministry that's a bit more thoughtful and a bit more in keeping with the things that we've come to love in Reformed theology. Okay? So what we're going to talk about in some of these, what you've been talking about, in looking at the purpose, the goals of RYM, in looking at the principles, and now today's session is on the presuppositions. These are attempts to describe the dynamics that are inherent in making sure that we do it right. And in many ways, we leave a lot of the doing up to you. A philosophy of ministry functions in large measure the way in which this does. This is an iPhone. I heart my iPhone. At 46 years old, this is Dick Tracy like nobody's business. This is amazing what this thing does. It's amazing what it does. I'm still jaw-droppingly amazed at it. If you think about this phone, though, there really are three components that are involved in the operation of this machine. Okay? First component is what we would call the hardware. The hardware is fairly obvious. There's this thing, it's kind of glass. It'll shatter. But it's Gorilla Glass. It's supposed to be tougher, you know. It's sort of somewhat plastic, somewhat glass kind of thing. There's some buttons on the side. There's a big button in the center that it will read my fingerprint, for goodness sakes. It's fantastic. In other words, there's hardware, stuff that I can touch that's tangible. All right? Now, when I press this button and keep my thumbprint on it, then all of a sudden I find that there are these colorful little squares, called apps. Okay? And they do all kinds of stuff. I got one here that's called Evernote. It's what I'm teaching this lesson from, because I've got my notes here using it. I've got one, never mind what that one is. I've got a calendar on here that helps me keep track of when I'm supposed to be where, supposedly. I have one that keeps my receipts for me for my business, so I can take a picture of a receipt and it uploads it to a website. I've got a weather app that I can touch a button and find out that it is now 17 degrees in the Nashville area. 17 degrees outside. What are we doing? In other words, there are apps that exist there. But there's a third thing about this phone that oftentimes people don't realize is there. And that is something called the operating system. Bear with me for a second. That is, there were a group of engineers, software engineers, who sat down and said, what we would like to do is to create a world, electronically speaking, where people can write their own apps. Because they're the smart ones, they're the creative ones, they're the clever ones. We want to turn it over to them for their needs. But what we're going to do is establish an environment. And this environment is going to have certain parameters, okay? It's going to have certain descriptors and delimiters that as long as you stay within those, you can do amazing, wonderful things. Okay, bear with me for a second. The phone's hardware is your location. It's your job. It's your church, even down to your physical building. It's the place where God has called you to serve. The apps are what you're going to do this year. These are things that you are going to plan. They're going to be conferences. They're going to be events. They're going to be socials. They're going to be counseling sessions with students. They're going to be small groups. It's going to be preaching. Those are your apps. RYM is trying to introduce you to the operating system. The philosophy of ministry is the environment, it's the constraints, it's the delimiters for how you will write your apps. Does that make sense? So that's kind of how that's our approach to why this happens. And when we get to presuppositions, it fits in with that. All right, anybody got any questions about that? I've been using the OS illustration for a while now, and it gets different every time. All right? Yes, question about that. That's exactly right. That'd be awesome. Let's take the illustration to its most absurd point. What is the goofiest game that we play? And that'll be one for my ride home. I'm headed home after this, and that'll be one that we can carry on with that. Okay, so hopefully by this time you've been at least introduced to the purpose and goals and the principles. What in the world less do we mean when we talk about the presuppositions? Let me see if I can do it this way. For RYM, the purpose and goals represent sort of the mission of RYM. What's the larger picture? Why are we here? We get a sense of the fact that that is contained in the Great Commission. We talk about reaching. We talk about equipping people for ministry. We also talk a little bit as far as the... Hold it, I thought that I had that and I don't. Just one second. There it is. We also talk about the goals. The goals help us know whether we've arrived at our mission. The purpose and goals are sort of describing the big direction of ministry. The principles, Scripture, justification, and sanctification. Y'all have done something on the principles, right? Okay. The principles are what I would refer to as the motor of RYM. In other words, the principles become the change agent, the thing that really impacts the hearts and minds of students as they begin to grapple with the question of what is truth? Or better yet, for this generation, where is truth? The doctrine of Scripture answers that question. The principles answer the question about how can I be right with God? Or better yet, what do I do with my guilt? Everyone asks and answers that question. We come in with a recommendation of saying only justification by grace through faith is how God deals with that sense of guilt. And then thirdly and finally, we talk to students about how they can change. How can I become something different than what I am? Questions of truth, questions of guilt, and questions of change are the three fundamental, really motor of what RYM is trying to do. And that's why our principles remain in the forefront. Okay, so what then are the presuppositions? The presuppositions are what we refer to as our mode. They all start with M. Mission, motor, mode. I couldn't live without being alliterated because every pastor is down with that. Let's do this. Let's say principles are the mortar. Principles are the mordor. Motor. Purpose and goals are the mission. And finally, presuppositions are the mode. What in the world do we mean by mode? Look, one of the things that we are trying to emphasize in this whole effort to be consistent with our theology and our methodology is that it is well within the realm of possibility that there is a posture in which you can do ministry that is harmful to people. There is a stance at which you can take with your students out of which you operate that itself can be more harmful than it is good to people. That is, you can be in possession of the right beliefs about theology, about the Bible, about everything else, and yet because the way you're doing ministry is not informed by those things, it can be downright destructive to people. The presuppositions are defined this way: how to do ministry, what to keep in mind in ministry so that we don't hurt people in the process. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, that's a deer right outside the window. That's what I'm thinking right now. That's amazing. That deer is just trotting right across the creek there. Somebody was like, cue the deer, cue the deer. The scene is not beautiful enough outside. It is a doe, I'm assuming, and here comes the rest of the family. That'd be awesome if you all just raced towards the window. Who out there wishes that they had their rifle? Just see they're all being like, man, they're just broadside to me right now. Look at her looking in. Hello. Oh, there comes the rest of the family. Bambi's coming. Look, if something with a rack comes out, then we're going to all get nervous. I bet you they're coming to drink water in that little pond there.
Oh, there's another one.
Our next, there's 4 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4 that I can count. Yeah, there's no way to get back. Let's just close in prayer. Look, you're not paying attention if you don't realize that people can be quite harmed in ministry. I know you would say, I came in to be helpful to people, but it's possible that ministry can be harmful. The presuppositions put you in a posture of ministry that honors the fact that people have different needs, okay? And puts you in a proper posture. We have in RYM 6 presuppositions. And I might throw in a 7th, maybe a 6.5 at the very end. Joey Stewart is actually going to do one of those, the one particularly on the church, and so I will not be covering that. Let me do the first of the presuppositions and then we'll take a break. That'd be okay? And we'll go and stare at the deer. Are they gone? No, they're still there. All right, so we're under presuppositions here. Number one, the first presupposition that we talk about is what we would call a biblical presupposition. Reformed theology, a biblical theology. That's my word. Our number one presupposition is that RYM is honest about its theological commitments from the very beginning. Now look, I want you to know it really is okay for you to be the kind of person who says to themselves, you know, Les, I'll be honest with you, this whole theology thing is a bit of a bother to me. I'm coming from a place in my tradition that doesn't necessarily value that. I feel like a lot of times theology sort of divides people up. It can be terribly unhelpful for people. For my students, it seems more confusing than it does anything else. I want you to know that's okay for you to be there. But I need you to know that we actually feel just the opposite. And it's my task, in many ways, when we talk about this presupposition, to set this in front of you. Why is it that Reformed theology is a presupposition? Now, notice something. Reformed theology is a presupposition and not a principle. Just because someone has acquiesced to the 5 points of Calvinism. Y'all, I had somebody who asked predestination into their heart this semester. They accepted election as their personal Lord and Savior. We are so happy that that somehow constitutes ministry. No, we reserve that for Scripture, justification, sanctification, to the foundation of the Word and to the gospel. What we mean, though, is it is impossible to come without a perspective on Scripture. RYM is convinced that it is unhealthy, even to the point of being destructive to a student's thinking about religion, to pretend that you come to the question without any philosophical or theological commitments. When I was growing up, I grew up in a context that went out of its way to say, you know what? The Baptists can be the Baptists. The Methodists can be down with the Methodists. You Presbyterians can believe whatever you want to believe. I'm going to believe the Bible. Now there's a part of me that actually resonated with that and still resonates with it. I like the desire to focus on Scripture. But the problem is, the second that you begin to talk about what that Scripture is, Scripture, what is Scripture? The second you answer that question, you are doing theology. It is not a question of whether you have a theology or whether you do not. It is a question of whether the one that you have is from the Bible. You cannot escape the issue of theology. Even people who say, you know what, I think they're going to come into the room in just a few moments. How awesome would it be if that thing just started trotting around the corner, looking around, poking around, wanting to eat stuff? This is awesome. But here's the thing. Eventually, the question of theology presses itself, even to the person who says, honestly, I'm not into that. I just want to focus on Jesus. Well, the second that I look and say, well, let me ask you a question. Which Jesus? There's a lot of Jesuses out there. There's the Jesus who is a really wise teacher. Is that all Jesus was? There's a Jesus who, shows us the way to sort of be self-sacrificial. There's a Jesus who is there to assist you along in your self-discovery and to bring you personal wealth and fortune. Which Jesus is it? Because there's a lot of them out there. You see what I'm saying? The issue of theology pushes itself. And so, so many years ago, 20, 30 years ago, RYM unabashedly started a youth conference at the beach called Reformed Youth Movement and said, we're just going to come right out with it. And so many people looked at that and thought, oh, you're going to name it Reformed? Oh, well, that'll work. Perfect. Well, because all you're going to do is let people know that you're just partisan and you're sectarian and you're all about your own little holy huddle. Well, I'm sure that's true. I'm not going to try to defend ourselves against the desire to build holy huddles. But I'll say this, from someone who's been in campus ministry for 20 years, I can say the exact opposite has happened from the youth who have received that. Look, it is unhelpful to a student to get to the college campus, or even a high school classroom for that matter, and have as his only sense of understanding this idea of relativism from within the Christian community itself. And it reminds you, it's a very pressure-packed thing. There's a professor that will look and say, give me a break. What are you, a Methodist, Presbyterian, Baptist? Well, I'm Baptist. Well, you guys can't even agree yourselves. Look how Protestantism has splintered and splintered and splintered. And what has it brought us? Right? And so the student feels very self-conscious, like, oh, and they always go and say, well, can't we just get rid of all these distinctions and just kind of be, where's the mere Christianity? This is nothing against, Lewis's attempt at doing this. In other words, it's unhelpful for students to feel that they can come without a philosophical disposition. Don't believe me? Let me see if I can use Europe as an illustration. Statistically speaking, Europe is racing towards Islam. Islam, the building of the temples, I forget the name of the temple, mosques, is rapidly expanding throughout Europe at this time at alarming rates. Alarming if you're not a Muslim. If you're a Muslim, it's delightful rates, I guess. Why? Europe typically spent about 50 years in front of America. There were trends that when they began in Europe would sort of trickle over, take about 25, 50 years or so to make it to America. Now, we live in a different world. The internet generation has created a very different speed with which movements and things happen and whatnot. But there's no doubt that Europe is racing towards this radical thing. Think about that for a second. Highly enlightened, highly atheistic, highly relativistic in the sort of philosophical sense, Europeans are gulping down this radical worldview that sort of, honestly, I think has serious issues to deal with when it comes to their treatment of women. Gulping down. Has serious issues to deal with the concept of holy war. Has a particularly violent fringe class to its following. It has a separatist view of culture to the point where France has to pass a law disallowing the burqa for women. Also has a very strict code of discipline in the 5 practices. Europe is doing this. Europe is gulping those things down. Why? I think here's the reason. Because it turns out that in the absence of real conviction, this is Alan Bloom in The Closing of the American Mind from the mid-'80s. Everybody's freaking out. Nobody believes anything. We're a culture of relativists. Every student that comes into my classes, Bloom said, says one fundamental conviction, and that is that there is no truth. We're relativists. Where is it going to bring us? What are we going to do? Well, it turns out that in the absence of any kind of conviction, the fear was not that people would believe nothing. What we're finding from Europe is that people will believe anything. And anything is the loudest voice of the time. And right now, the loudest voice in worldwide post-religious society is Islam. It is coming to our door. And the fact that we're only now in this last decade seeing a little bit of the violence that's inherent at the social upheaval that comes in that worldview just means that we're a little bit behind Europe. It has been unhelpful for us to say, hey, we don't worry about any of the distinctions. It's kind of hard. In RYM, we're looking and saying, you know what? Here's the deal. I'm going to put it in front of you. This is where we stand. Yeah, I got a view of baptism. I'm not necessarily going to fight about that. Really, all I'm interested in really pushing on you is Scripture, justification, and sanctification. I got opinions about the other stuff, but I'm going to at least take a side. We found students with great appreciation of that in RUF over the years. In RUF, college students are saying, at last, someone will at least say, this is what I think the Scripture teaches about this. Everybody keeps asking me, I want to do a study on the differences between the denominations. Why? Because they feel deeply insecure about where they are. It is a presupposition in RYM that we stand upon an explicit expression and a statement of faith as housed, given to us by the Westminster Confession of Faith from the Westminster Divines, 350, 400 some odd years old. That is presupposed in what we do, and it creates stability And it means that I don't abuse students by giving them the right to think that they have an objectivity of which they do not have. Nor do I. Okay? All right, questions about that? Where are we on time? Perfect time for a break. 45 minutes in, unless somebody's got a question. 2 minutes for questions. That's what I've got at 3:13. So painfully clear. Again, it's okay just to let it kind of wash past you at first, like Joey was saying yesterday, to sort of let the fire hydrant go on past, because this gets repeated on a regular basis in the years to come. Okay? All right, great. Let's take a break then. 10 minutes and I'll get cracked back up again. Let's go look at the deer. Let's go stare. You kind of want to jump at them and get them to I like watching them kind of leap and run. Yeah, they're awesome. Powerful creature. Yeah. Thank you. That's good. That helps my mental thing there.
You look like you needed a water.
Aren't you so kind? Thank you so much. All right, so we're kicking around these presuppositions. We went through the first one. Again, presuppositions form the mode of ministry, the posture in which we stand. And the fact that we are explicit about our theological commitments puts us in a posture, of confidence. Student actually looks and realizes, they're not just making this stuff up. I think there's a generation of people that were really tired of going to youth group and having it be, what does this verse mean to you all the time? But that's just my thought. And again, that doesn't mean that we dominate the conversation and not ask them how they feel about it, but it does mean that we're working to at least get something across. All right, the second presupposition that we have is the presupposition that says God is at work. The first presupposition about Reformed theology is what we would call a theological presupposition. This is what we're going to call a providential presupposition. And that's simply this. The work of God in the world is being done despite humanity's efforts to work against it. And as much as I love you and what you're doing in your ministry, you're part of the problem. And so am I. We are what God has to overcome before He begins to function well in extending His purposes in the world. But the knowledge, though, that God is advancing His purposes in the world is a source of extraordinary confidence for the minister for 1,000 different reasons. A number of years ago, when I was the campus minister at the University of Memphis, the University of Memphis was a great place to begin to do campus ministry because of the layout of the school. One of the things that we're going to learn here in just a minute is that demographics are a big deal. And the University of Memphis was basically laid out on a rectangle that is right in the center of the entire city, if you look at a map of it. And dead in the center of that rectangle was a cafeteria that they had turned into a bit of a sort of food court kind of thing. It had a Subway sandwich in it. It had a Chick-fil-A, go figure. It was a wonderful place. And the great thing was, whenever students had time in between classes, they would come swinging through this cafeteria and come and hang out. So my contact work as a campus minister was really, really easy because all I did was plant myself in that cafeteria and folks would just kind of show up. It's like unto the same thing that you do when you go to lunch periods at the local high school that you're serving. So on one occasion, I'll never forget, this is my first year of being there, there was a young lady who had been very peripherally involved in our ministry. She was actually much more plugged into another ministry. But she came rushing into the little cafeteria there where I had sort of set up my camp, probably had 2 or 3 people sitting around the table with me who were also on breaks. And she was bawling, crying. I mean, to the point where it's kind of that, where you get that sort of a herky-jerky thing going on, where you're like, and you can't sort of get your breath because it's coming out so hard. And so I was like, Kimberly, good grief, are you okay? Come sit down. Are you all right? Did somebody hurt you? What happened? No. In class, it happened in class. What had happened was, as we tried to sort of get the tale out of her, was apparently her professor had taken a bit of a shot at Christians. It was probably unfair, it was probably overstated, but it was a little over the top. And Kimberly had felt it incumbent upon herself to say, you know what, this is my time. Now I'm gonna get up and make my stand. And so she raised her hand, and I'm sure very politely, because she's a sweet girl, ended up saying something to the effect of, well, the Bible, blah, 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 and I think that Jesus would blah, 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 and Christians say blah, blah, blah. She just sort of makes her stand, right? Well, while she's talking, she says, she's got a guy who sits directly in the desk next to her who is doing this the entire time. Until when she finishes getting seated, he begins to completely verbally abuse her, makes fun of her, mocks her. Professor does nothing to sort of shut it down, just kind of lets it ride. He basically takes a nice little 5-minute rant before finally the class is dismissed and it's over. Well, the guy doesn't even stop then. And of course, Kimberly's thinking to herself, this is my chance. I'm here to witness to this person. But she finds herself out in the hall with this guy being, you mean that you think that blah, 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 and you think that blah, 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 and that da, 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 and that there's a hell, and you're I mean, just obnoxious antagonism towards the gospel. Of course she burst into tears and came rushing back to the thing. Well, as I begin to sort of pick up the pieces of this story, we're all being like, okay, I'm so sorry. This is why Jesus said that people weren't going to stand on the sidelines and cheer for us. Count it all joy. I think he said something about it at one point. They're not really mocking you. They're mocking him. That's his encouragement. I'm so sorry. But then she kind of waves me off. And I realized that I was talking to the wrong person. She waves me off and she's like, no. Like that wasn't any of the issue. She had no problem suffering for her faith. She said, no. She goes, what's getting me is the thought that that young man walked away and I could very well be the last person that he ever talks to about the gospel. And what if they go to hell because of me? And I suddenly thought, persecution is not your issue. Condescension and high-mindedness is your issue. I'm talking to the wrong person. Look, what we had to sort of explain to her is to say, my dear, God is using crooked sticks to strike straight blows all over the place, and that includes us. It is not on your shoulders to be the mechanism of conversion for the masses. This is not on you. It is not on you in the larger sense of being able to manipulate God's providence and to force things to happen. This is more prevalent in my soul than I think I ever could have guessed when I started campus ministry. How I have this instinct inside of me to want to be finished. I want for things to be completed. I want to kind of come to a point, and I long for this, where like every email is answered, every pastoral question is dealt with, everyone's growing in their faith, and we're just we're at a moment of stasis, right? We've arrived. We've sort of been there. I began to express these things very early on in my ministry to my wife, who's awesome, because Ginger is not a confrontational person. She is the most low-maintenance wife that any person ever has known. She's wonderful and awesome for that. But she has this great way of sort of throwing out these kind of random thoughts that she has no idea. She doesn't intend to be profound, but I end up talking for him for the next 17 years, which is when we had this conversation. Because at that time, I had gotten a computer with an email address, which, you remember when your email address was like, 85 characters long, it was a bunch of numbers and .us, .ed, everybody's looking going, no, we don't. Ours was AOL. What are you talking about? Bear with me. Come on, somebody here. My age, I'm looking for somebody. Anyway, so she says, she looks in, and at this time I had gotten into Tetris. My father, God rest his soul, was the first one to introduce me. He's like, you heard of this game where the shapes come down and you got to fit them in the thing? And I was like, no, what is that? He's like, it's called Tetris. And he goes, I can't stand it. It's so awesome. And so I got Tetris on my computer. And, I probably have a little bit of an obsessive personality and just kind of got into this stupid game, And down would come the shapes, right? And you can spin them and turn them right. And you're trying to get them all fit in the right place. So Ginger says, she goes, it's kind of like ministry is a little bit like a game of Tetris. She said, you got to always kind of keep fitting the thing. She goes, but if all of the pieces came down exactly where they were supposed to, it really wouldn't be much of a game, would it? Look, I'm the minister here. I'm supposed to come up with the profound illustrations. Just whammo across my jaw. In other words, this is what you do, y'all. The pieces fall down, and they fall down in wrong places. The student called at 2 a.m., and you needed your night's rest that night more than any other night. The funeral you had to go to interrupted it again. And here's the crazy thing. Sometimes you slept through that phone call, and you weren't there for that student. And sometimes you made a decision because an elder loved you enough to tell you that said, no, you need to go on vacation and let the other person do this funeral. And you walked away feeling an ocean of guilt, youth pastor, because you weren't the one doing it. What RYM is trying to say to you over and over again is God is at work. It is not your job to manipulate the Spirit and make this whole thing work. Gird up your confidence, youth worker, that God is at work. It's junior high. It's 2 years. You are a seed planter. Because there was no resolution to that relationship doesn't mean that God is finished with that person. But they're going to go off, they're going to graduate, they're going to go to college, they're going to drop out of the church, and they'll never be back again. Really? You know that? Really? Well, thank goodness we have you in God's church to fix everything. If we could just get everybody to you. There's a lot of pity party that can come in this, and God is at work is a providential presupposition that reminds us that He's doing what He needs to do. And I can take confidence in that. And what it does is it keeps me from stressing students out. There's nothing more enjoyable than when one of my campus ministers, that's great, one of my campus ministers, the people over whom I'm charged to serve in my particular area with RUF, it's awesome when they have sort of a family tragedy that takes them off campus. Wife is really sick, the baby is just arrived, blah, 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 blah. And they call me and they're like, well, I've told the interns to do what they want to do. I've tried to meet with the leadership and everything. I just don't know. Inevitably, and I'm telling you, this is really like 9 times out of 10, the ministry grows and explodes and more people come and get involved without them being there. And it's so much fun on the other side of it than to be kind of like, I don't understand what they did. Like, it was all awesome. And I was like, yeah, you quit trying to manipulate it. You quit trying to make it the most perfect thing and stressing people out because of it. And you let them kind of go and run with it themselves. The presupposition of God being at work can grant you that confidence as you do. All right, questions about that? We love God is at work. We talk about that one a lot. It's nice when these kinds of things make it in your regular parlance. And you begin to remind of each other. Get on the phone, stressed out about a student. You got somebody that's just ticked you off. You got some youth group person who told their session member father on you that you showed a PG-13 movie at the youth retreat. Gasp. And you're talking to your friend on the other end of the line, and they look and say, God is at work. That's comfort. That's there. Yeah, what you got?
How do we keep that from leading us into apathy or
Yeah. Yeah. By the rest of what we're talking about. Again, there's no question that my sin is sophisticated enough to look for the pendulum on the other side almost every time. So if I find myself being overworked, then I will race towards complete apathy and anticipate that. In my experience, though, people who are self-aware and initiative-taking enough to come to a youth conference to train as a pastor, my guess is that somebody at home is ticked at you for spending too much time with kids. I'm guessing that. Now, some of you may struggle with laziness, and somewhere out there's going to be a ruling elder that will tell you that. Will inform you of that. But my guess is if you're like most people and you're conscientious enough to be here, you're probably stressing out. You've spun that wheel out a lot, and your wife is frustrated with you. And so are your kids. So, yeah, that's a good question. Number 3. This one's kind of a big one. I want to camp out on this. We talk about focusing on the individual as a presupposition. Well, you want to talk about a way to keep from abusing people. This one's a big one. There are 2 foci that this presupposition helps us refer to. The one is relatively simple to state. The other one is a bit more complex I want to draw out. By saying focusing on the individual, the person who helped pull some of these things together told me one time that what that was trying to stress is that there is a role that you play in the life of your students. And that role is defined by your mentorship of them and over them. And oftentimes the inertia of youth ministry especially, And this is because when you gather up the insecurities of youth and put those in the same pool with an approval-sucking youth director, oftentimes the youth director would like so badly to be connected to those students that he changes from being a mentor and becomes a buddy. That is, it ceases to be, the roles get confused. And so this presupposition is always trying to remind you that those roles don't change. You're still functioning as a voice into that person's life that you're trying to speak. And that's healthy. It means that you are not the person who, on the youth retreat, delights in, focusing on various bodily functions. You are a mentor to these people. I know you're funny. You crack me up. You don't understand, Les. It's kind of the way that I break the ice, is I, uncork a curse word or something. Don't do that. You're a mentor. Be someone who actually embraces your role as a youth minister, a youth pastor, a youth worker. They desperately need someone to understand them. Yes, we're going to talk about that in just a second. But they also need someone to not necessarily go there when they do. And sometimes the mere decision that you make not to go there is extraordinarily helpful for them. So we talk about building in health in our relationships by remembering your role as a mentor, not a buddy. That's this relationship. That's the first sort of foci that this presupposition has. But over the years, as this philosophy sort of got fleshed out, focus on the individual also began to answer this question about dealing with people in their diversity and not in some sort of monolithic, myopic way. Monolithic and myopic. When was the last time you heard those phrases thrown out in a sentence? How to connect with people. Use the word monolithic and myopic. I like to talk about the magical ministry tool. And yes, you should hear the Beatles tune in your head when you say that phrase. The Beatles, they were a band like in the 60s, in the 70s. Okay. It's not that bad yet, right? But we love the magical ministry tool. There is an inertia in the heart of every youth minister that pulls towards saying, I would love to get down that thing that just works. I remember when I was doing youth, when I was in college, and actually during the time when I was in seminary, I remember longing to get my degree in counseling from seminary. Now, I actually got a minor in counseling from Reformed Theological Seminary in Jackson. It was extraordinarily helpful. 2 thumbs up for the marriage and family program at RTS in Jackson and other places. So, having established that, I began to realize the further that I got into that the motive for my wanting to be there was not to help people. What I began to realize was my desire to get the counseling thing was so I could figure out the deal. So I could fix this student. Listen to me, it's extraordinarily valuable, the experience that I got in this. But I was searching for the magical ministry tool. I wanted someone to basically show me how I could take student A, immature student A, put them through the program, and then out came super mature student B. And you know what? It works every time. That's what I long for. That's what we all long for. The presupposition of focusing on the individual means that I come in with an assumption that this person is unique, deeply unique, that there are things which describe and define this person that will take me time to begin to move towards and understand. Let me see if I can continue to flesh this out. Back in the day, we used to have this drawing and say, here is your youth here. And he has a beret on. Why, we don't know. He's got a question mark on his face because he plays with markers. No, you're wondering who he is. I mean, that child is unique. Lots of things define what that student is like. This particular student has what? A family background. Okay? You don't have to be Sigmund Freud to realize the power that someone's family of origin has over their psyche. Part of your job, a presupposition of your job, is that you go diving into the multitude of ways in which families operate. It's really interesting. Again, Mark Lowry, one of the guys who helped about this, and I used to talk about this, this was from a couple years ago, where he mentioned that more and more the research that's coming out about what's the word I'm looking for? What is it when something's disconnected from everything else? The atomistic view of families, where there's not a ton of interaction from the outside with families, means that there's stuff that passes under the radar screen that would, curl your hair if you heard it. And some of you are looking going, yeah, that was my family. You can't imagine the garbage that passed for relationships in my family. What that means is it is a huge discipline to look and say that part of what I want to get to know in this student is, tell me about how you grew up. What is that dynamic like? Pursue that line. We know that that student is in possession of a personality. Personality obviously is a very complex topic. You can get a whole degree on that particular idea as well. I'll say this, I think that our personalities are much more, I'm very influenced by the guy at RTS in Jackson on this idea, that our personality is framed to a large degree by the choices that we made during the formative years of our lives, much more so than a DNA. We tend to want to default to DNA and say, hey, that's the ABCs of me, just got to get used to it, who I am. In other words, I was patterned this way, came out of the womb this way, baby. Well, very early on in one's formative stage, I can see my children and have watched my children make decisions as they relate to the world around them that are in keeping with strategies that they have to make their life work for them. Not all of those were bad decisions, but their personality, the way in which they come across to others, is a function of the things that they value. For example, my middle daughter is my performer. We don't know where she got that, how that made it into the DNA pool. But very early on, I could see her, I was talking about me, that was the joke, never mind. Very early on, I could see her sort of get a whiff of the stage. I think there was legitimately some sort of things that she's funny, she knows she's funny, and she could say these funny things. But very early on, I could see the look in the eyes when all of a sudden she got a reaction out of somebody. Or somebody clapped. Her grandmother was just like, that's just the funniest thing. And you could suddenly see a little twinkle in the eye. And what did she do? She sold her soul. She sold her soul to that attention, that laughter. And suddenly she's built a whole persona, a whole personality around being the funny person in class. Now you have to understand, Caroline is me. That's how I know her that well. She doesn't like the fact that I know her that well, but we connect on that level. Why? Because there's commitments that are made that form the personality. That's not just the way they are. Why are you the way they are? What decisions did you make when you were in elementary school? How did you react to your family's divorce? Did that create this? What do you mean you're just shy? Was that not a decision that you made at one point to say, well, you know what? They can't get me in here. If I'm in here and in here, nobody can touch me. That's a decision. So they've got a personality. What else do they have? They have, how about education? Hey, don't be naive. Even if you've got a room full of homeschoolers at your church, that is a decision about education. That is a formative thing. By the way, I got multiple claims say, when are we going to have a seminar about ministering to homeschool students? Because there just tend to be a lot of it. And this is not about being critical of that. It's not about promoting homeschooling. But it's a dynamic. It is a piece of that person's personal history that would be helpful to know. And realize that there are certain things which are common to that, certain advantages and certain disadvantages. What is that educational place like? Well, they only go to private school. We classically train our children. Okay? What is that like? I'll never forget. It's been very interesting. No, I'm not going to say that. You're not supposed to use your children that much in illustration, so I'm going to leave both of them alone. But they're teenagers and it's too easy. I don't know. But they're so cute. They're darling. Beautiful. Oh, knock me out. Can't wait to see them tonight. The educational environment in which they're in is the majority of their involvement. Look, you need to understand that what goes on at school is the norm. And for the homeschoolers out there, you're going to look and say, see, that's not true of us, and that's why. But bear with me for a second. One of my really good friends in Oxford tells this hilarious story about his oldest son. Because they were one of those families who decided they were going to be anti-Santa Claus folks. Now, if you're an anti-Santa Claus person, this is not a story about you. I'm not expressing an opinion one way or the other. I know that if you rearrange the letters, Santa spells Satan. I know that, the decision was, well, we're not going to lie to our children. Well, okay. Yeah, God forbid they should believe that there's some merry person out there that dispenses presents to them once a year. But never mind with that. My friend had made a decision, we're not going to lie to our children, we're going to tell them. So at age 4 or 5 years old, they sat down with their oldest child and said, look, you know that we're Santa Claus. You know that your presents come from us, we go get them. Oh, right, Daddy, right, Daddy. But you know that other kids' parents, they like to have belief and sort of fun with it, so let's not spoil it for them. Right, Daddy, okay, got it. So they've established it. They had this conversation, he said, multiple times. All right, fast forward 2 years after that, when the PlayStation made its debut on the scene. This is an older story, of course. The PlayStation is there. And so the oldest boy, the child, goes and asks the parents, what do you want for Christmas this year? Well, I want a PlayStation. Well, he keeps saying it. Sometimes you hear Christmas wishes and you're kind of like, oh, well, good luck with that. We'll see what Santa Claus does. But they were like, okay, PlayStation. And at this time, they were going through economically lean times. And they really weren't sure whether they could do it. Well, the more he said it, finally, my friend had to look at him and say, hey, look, buddy, I know you're really wanting this, but we're not really sure that we're going to be able to kind of swing a PlayStation. That's a big gift. And he said he looked at him with this look of, complete confusion and said something to the effect of, well, that's no skin off your nose. Santa Claus is the one who brings that. He's the one who brings the PlayStation. And my friend was like, but we told you that there's no Santa, what? How did that not get through to you? You agreed with us. You nodded your head. And so my friend's illustration is this. He goes, there are certain cultural realities that are so pervasive in the life of the child that it doesn't matter how much data you throw at it. Bing, bing, it just bounces off. It is too prevalent. School is that way for your students. It is 8 hours of their day. It is the majority of their day. And again, that terrifies most people. I'm not saying it's terrifying. That's the reason why I think a lot of people go to homeschooling, because they're like, oh, how would I turn my child over for 8 hours a day? Believe me, it's easy. It's great. I got my wife back when Luke goes off to first grade. Sorry. My wife was here. She would think that was very funny. Look, when we say focus on the individual, it means that we are trying to find the things that create that cultural world. And school is that. How can you do that if you don't go there? I know that it always feels like a concession on your part. Well, I went to the high school about once or twice last semester. It's not enough. Their world is too dominated by that for you to be on the outside of that particular portion. What else? What are the other things that sort of affect the individual and fashion who this person is? Oh, here we go. Yes, friend groups. Pop culture, huge. Pop culture. What else? IT, information technology. Yeah, you better be thinking about that. I do the social media seminar every year for our church, and it's amazing how their mouths are agape. And it's like, yeah, this moves quick. Yeah, there's a whole world of social media that almost becomes, it's swallowing up a lot of these things. Some of this friend groups discussion has got to include a discussion about social media. It's just a very big deal because it's the new theater in which they're living those lives. Doesn't mean that you got to be the participant. who's, sharing goofy stuff. But you better understand it if we're going to have a sense of it. Don't let me depress anybody. So here's the question. When you meet a student, this student has all these complexities, and the presupposition of the individual is a way of saying that we honor that complexity in each and every student. They're all different. They're all changing. They're all in radical flux. That's good news for you, because it means there's never a dull moment. You have the greatest job in the world. Next year, it's a completely different deal. It all rolls right back over again. People you don't like, they graduate. It's wonderful. Whereas in the church, they show up and they stay. I'm kidding. Somebody kind of grunted at that. Huh. Yeah, exactly. Now here's my next question. Joey asked me to kind of look at some of this stuff here. How then do I get to this? In a sense, knowing it's there can help me direct some of my questions, but there really is a helpful way in which you can sort of find questions to draw students out. I think that one of the great exercises for honoring the individual presupposition is learning some go-to questions that you know have the ability to draw a person out. This is part of your skill set, y'all. That you're trying to build a set of questions. And so I had a sketch outline of first-time one-on-one questions and then sort of follow-up one-on-one questions. That if I ever got a student in any kind of context, whether we were just chatting after youth group or something, I went to a couple of different things. Okay? And here they are now. I think there's like 10 or 12 of these questions. First question I would inevitably ask is where are they from? Are you originally from Oxford, Mississippi? Is this your home? Have you always lived here? Why do I ask that question? Is there transition in your life? It's amazing how quickly now, after all these years of asking this question, I can spot a military kid. Because when you look at a military kid and say, where are you from? They all go, and I always look and go, military kid? Yes. Army brat. They always have this story. Why? Because they have no idea where they call home. But guess what? That's a dynamic. That's a piece of information that's helpful to know how that displacement works in there. Where are you from? Was there a transition in your life? Okay. Second question, are your parents originally from there? Where are your parents from? What kind of information will you give me from the outset? We don't ask a question like, so tell me what your parents are like. That is way too much pressure for a first, second, even third meeting for someone. But something innocuous as, so are your parents both from there? Well, my dad is, but my mom went through all kinds of crazy stuff and she's from someplace else. Oh, you just let me know something, didn't you? I now have a little bit of information about your family history just from asking where they're from. Some students know a lot about their parents' personal history. Some of them know very little. Oh, that's really interesting. So what does your dad do? The father's vocation is a wonderful question. And I'm always shocked at how little information students, when I ask them, have about their parents' vocation. It's really amazing. And I'm sure that my daughters do the exact same thing. What in the world is an area coordinator? I don't know what an area coordinator is. How would they ever have any idea what it does? He gets in a car and drives and stays in a hotel and then talks to us on FaceTime. It sounds just like Anna Grace, doesn't it, Molly? Molly knows Anna Grace. So there's a sense in which I open up a door then of finding out what their father does. I also get to find out whether dad is happy in his job. Because this child will let you know. If the child is bored with their daddy's job, daddy is likely bored with their job. Oh, does he like that? Is he good at that? What kind of position does he have? Is he low on the totem pole? Is he a big CEO? Does he come home or does he not come home? There's a whole set of questions about relationship with dad. And then follow it right back up with mom. So I got you. Whatever you do, don't ever say this in the hearing of the mom. Oh, so your mom doesn't work. Don't ever say that. You know, you only make this mistake once. I remember the guy who looked at me, this is before I had kids, who looked at me and was kind of like, oh, she works. She just works in the house. And I was like, yeah, that's right. And then I have a wife and kids, and I realized I don't want her job. I had her job for a couple weekends when she went out of town, and it's horrible. So we stay away from that. So what does mom do? What's her role there? But I'm listening for their reaction to those relationships. I don't need the data. The data is a little piece of information. I want to hear their reaction from it. So we've just done parents. Gotcha. So are you an only child? Are you the only person there? That's an interesting question. No. I've got 7 brothers and sisters. Whoa. Interesting. That's a big deal. One of my wife's best friend married a guy who was number 6 of 11. That is what we call a family dynamic. And I know that my wife's best friend, it's funny, if she was sitting right here, she'd be like, tell him, did not account for the expectations that someone from a family of 11 would put on their spouse. That's what we call a deal. Interesting. No, actually, it's just me and my brother. But my brother's much, much older. He's from he was from my mom's first marriage. Oh, interesting. Another piece of information about that family of origin. So I ask about siblings. Next question that's always safe is, so do you get along with your brothers and sisters? They drive you crazy? I usually can just say that. Do they drive you crazy? And they'll immediately respond. Every junior high and high schooler will almost always say yes to one of those. Oh, well, everybody said my little brother. Anna Grace and Caroline are best buddies. They've been best friends, from the very beginning. But it is a constant war against the 9-year-old. Luke does battle every single day against sisters. It's like he takes up sword in the morning and prepares himself for battle. But that dynamic means something. And I find out something about family conflict. I found out something about family frustration when they simply react to their siblings, right? Okay, so I haven't even talked about what they do with their time. All that's just family of origin question. Next question, what do you think about school? Do you like that school? Again, it's not a question, tell me about school. It's too much. But do you like it? Do you enjoy it? Get them to place a value on their school experience from the outset, and they'll immediately open up to various things that they'll say about it. To be honest with you, I absolutely despise school. You long for someone to give you some sort of energetic response. Because as soon as I get some energy, I want to head down that little path. I had a therapy professor in seminary who said that oftentimes will happen when you're walking down the path of someone's life with them, they will open up a place in the hedge to more deeper versions of themselves, more deeper understandings of themselves. And again, when someone comes along and says, yeah, I despise that place, or even, I love school. Who says that? But someone who says that. That's a door that I'm walking through. Really? Tell me about that. Are you into stuff at school? Why do you like it so much? What's so bad about it? Who's your worst teacher? What's a class that you're the worst at? Get them to sort of have some energy towards it, and suddenly their personality starts coming out. Okay? So do you like or do you not like school? Next question about school. What are you into at school? Which kid are you? I think I've asked this question 10,000 times. Probably asked it of Molly when we first sat down and visited with her our first time. What kid were you in high school? What kid were you in junior high? What kid were you in elementary? Were you the teacher's pet? Were you the class clown? Were you the bad kid, the bad seed? You'd be amazed how many times I get a yes answer to that question. Yeah, I was the black sheep. I just like messing up stuff. I like to rock the boat. That's kind of who I was from the very beginning. Which kid were you? Get them to describe themselves at school. It's an innocuous question, but it's amazing what it shows about how they felt about themselves. Next question, of which kid were you? What activities are you involved in? Are you into sports? Do you do cheerleading? Do you do, are you into some sort of academic thing like the annual staff, the yearbook staff, the school newspaper? What activities do you, what are you busying yourself with? Sports people have a whole set of stuff themselves. If you stumble across a sports person, I want to know whether they chose to be in their sports thing or are they living out mom or dad's dream for their sports existence. That's a big question for all of my sports guys. Is this your dream or is this their dream? You resent that? All those movies in the 80s were uncovering that. You know what Breakfast Club is all about? Emilio Estevez, look. Breakfast Club. How to be relevant to your audience. This is a 30-year-old movie. It was awesome. Breakfast Club. I think my father enjoyed that movie. You know, you just got to get used to that kind of thing, right? Thank you, appreciate that. Judd Nelson in the back. So there's sports people have a whole opened up kind of thing. What if it's a niche thing? No, honestly, I don't do anything at school. That's not a non-answer to that question. So you go, you get on the bus, you turn around and come home, that's it? Next question about school. Who is your closest crowd? Presumably you saw the movie Mean Girls with Lindsay Lohan. It's obligatory. Remember the scene where they're panning through the cafeteria and they're like, there's the Asian crowd. There's the Asians who are geeks. Then there's the dieting crowd. Then there's the crowd that eats their feelings. And then and they go through the sort of thing, looking at the deal. No more pervasive truth it comes out in your student's life than what happens in the lunchroom. Look, you've just forgotten. You've been far enough away from it that you forgot. This is your tray. When you walk out of the lunchroom, you got your stuff, and you turn and look at the room. What do you do? That is always and forever the most challenging part of someone's day. Where am I going to sit? Did my friends save me a seat? Did that happen? Do I have a trusted, close friend who will always save me the seat? Do they get very intimate with that sort of crowd? Or do I freeze up thinking, I'm going to sit by. This is why, if you can find an administrator at your local high school or junior high that will allow you to come during lunch, you'll see it all go down. Every bit of it go down. You'll watch people pass in and out of the halls of junior high power right there in the lunchroom. You got to do it. You have to be in the midst of that. I know it's painful, but that's what ministry is moving yourself into uncomfortable places. It's the definition of it. That's a whole other story. Okay, so school. That's the last thing. The next sort of phase I move into is their future. How do they see their future? Well, so do you want to go to college? Is that sort of on your radar? Few people say no to that, but there's other people that are kind of like, I dread college. Interesting. Why? How do you conceive of your future? You know, we could add to this sort of map of someone's character, you could add their sense of their own destiny. How are you going to end up? Where do you think this is going to take you? I'll say this, oftentimes you're the very first person who's ever asked them that question. You know what? Honestly, I always wish that I could be an artist, but I don't think my parents are going to go for that. That's interesting. I'm not sure you should be an artist either. There ain't no money in art, being an artist, that's for sure, unless you're really good at it. But that says something about them. How do they view their destiny? Are you going to go to college? Where do you want to go? You want to go far away, or do you want to stay close to home? I love that question. Oh, I'll never leave Mississippi. I got that answer a lot when I was at Ole Miss. Would someone say that? Because what did you just discover? Is he a homebody, or is he just itching to get out of that house? Ding, ding, ding. If somebody gives me kind of like, get me the Sam Hill away from that place and those people in that house. Maybe we should talk about that. That's a little open hedge that I dive off into the side and be like, that'd be interesting. What do you want to get away from the most? So it's my anticipation for the future. Near, close, far away. Favorite question of all time. 5 years from now, if you could be any place that you wanted to be, where would you be? Like if you can map it out. I know God's providence, blah, 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 blah. But if you could pick where you're going to be in 5 years, remember, if they're 12 years old, that means it's 17. If they're 18, 23. Where do they want to be after college? Where is this going? You'll pick up despondency if they say, I don't know. I have no idea. Not real sure I care. Well, that tells you something, doesn't it? We know what kind of machinery is turning inside their hearts. Where do you want to be in 10 years? If they got interested enough in the first question, I'll go again for the 10-year plan. You want to be married? Absolutely not. Not a chance in the world I'm getting married. Huh, that's interesting. Have some experiences at home? Somebody soured you on marriage? See how that goes? Next question is, that's the future. That's the destiny sets of questions. The last set of questions, I think I said the destiny was the last. This is the real last, is where are you now? It's too difficult to be like, so where are you spiritually? Because all you did was put a gun to their head and say, I have a theological exam for you, and will you or will you not pass it? Go. That's what you said. That's what they heard you say when you asked how they're doing spiritually. Instead, what about something like this? Say, look, rate this last semester for me on 3 levels. Number one, how is this semester academically? I love to ask that question because it's a very easy question to answer. Oh, same as always, C's, you know, maybe a B here and there. I'm just kind of average. For some reason, people don't mind talking about kind of where they were with their grades. Or, well, it wasn't that great, I had a B. Oh, all right, perfectionist, oldest child, right? Academically, how was it? Second question, okay, rate this on a scale of 1 to 10 on how it was socially. Like, how's it going at school? Do you feel like you're making friends? Are your friends trustworthy? Are you into them? Is it kind of cool what y'all do together? Do you feel like your friends have betrayed you? Apparently, for junior high girls, that's all that happens, is utter betrayal from each other. And I read the kind of garbage that gets said on Instagram and you know, the Snapchat thing. We haven't gotten to Snapchat yet, but I don't want to talk about it. It makes me nervous just thinking about it. But it's amazing the kind of garbage they get away with saying to each other. Amazing to me. So how was it socially this year? Now I've set them up with 2 questions. Academically, that's a safe question. Socially, a little more interesting. Then I love to ask the question, so like, just for the sake of discussion, like, how would you rate this last semester spiritually? You see, now they realize that it's an innocuous question because you're still just having fun. It's just working through the information. Boy, and how do you answer that question? For whatever it's worth, no way I asked that question less than 100, 200 times in my time at Ole Miss. More than 95% of the time, they told me how their quiet times were. For whatever that's worth. I'm not making any value judgment on that. I'm just saying that's an interesting notion, isn't it? How is this spiritually? Immediate reaction to whether I read my Bible or not. Less than 1% I ever heard the name Jesus. That ought to tell us something. That ought to be a little bit of a red flag. That somewhere in there, when somebody asks you how you're doing spiritually, Jesus is a bit of an afterthought. All right? So the 3 sort of academically, socially, spiritually. Hey, what else you got? Anything occurred to you as sort of a good question? This is a good time to share resources. Got a little time for this. Any other thoughts going along with that question set? Yes, by all means, please.
We're in a community of a church that I'm real uncomfortable with asking questions about the parents or who's your worst teacher. Think a little bit about that. I mean, I'm friends with a lot of their parents.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. I honestly would not ask a question of anyone that would make me uncomfortable. At the same time, my daughter doesn't have a ton of mentors outside of me and her teachers whom she finds antagonistic. And so my default mode, if I was going to go for honesty, I'm okay with going there. I'll say this. Part of the skill set that's intuitive in this job, it's not teachable, but there really is an intuitive sense of whether or not you're called to youth ministry, as to whether or not you can navigate those kind of things with some measure of ease. Is this too much? Is this inappropriate? Is this kind of awkward? I don't have to ask it like, who's your worst teacher? That's me being kind of goofy Lester. But Les is short for Lester. I don't want to talk about it. But there's a sense in which I could get away with that because I knew my own mojo. You got to match that to your own personality and how you're posturing yourself with folks. Some people can get away with uncorking the sort of over the top. The guy I work for is one of these people who just every conversation is sort of like a grenade. It's like, just sort of throws it in and it blows everything up. And a lot of times because he says way over the top things. But after knowing him for 25 years, I know now that his goal is that he can get away because he's so bombastic with going out here because instead of bringing this person here, he brought him there. See what I'm saying? But he had to learn that about himself, and you've got to learn that about yourself as well. What can I get away with in terms of my posture towards these students? That's a great non-answer to your question is what it is. But does that make sense?
Because you're balancing actually being the ally of the authority.
Yes. As long as it's a real balance. I'll say this. I do think that I really need my youth directors to advocate for my children. And if I'm defensive about that, I think I failed as a parent. If I'm defensive that Anna Grace and Caroline think that, oh no, IPC, where's IPC? Doggone it. Ainsley, good grief. They think Ainsley is as cool as she can be. Ainsley is cool. Ainsley's funny. And Ainsley is great for my daughters. If I get defensive that there's something going on between those two that's not privy to me, I think that's a failure on my part as a parent. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. She better have an outlet for that, because if she doesn't talk to Ainsley about it, she's going to go talk to some junior high girl who is going to give her some view of it that's 1,000 times worse. I expect Anna Grace and Caroline. Look, you do know that there's coming a day when your children are going to have to forgive you for how you raised them. Yeah, own that now. and it'll be a little bit better as they sort of wrestle through that. There's a universal understanding. That's a really interesting question. I got to let that cook for a little while. About those roles. I'll say this, that's why that other foci of this focusing on the individual, I think, caused you to ask that question, because I realize I do have a role here that's not their buddy, but I am their mentor. But at the same time, there's times which I need to build that trust, because I don't know if this is inappropriate to go there, but we struggle with it first with sex education with our children. I'm a bit more of just sort of, lay things out there. My wife is not wired that way. And we had a lot of discussions about how we were going to parent our kids through their impressions of sexuality, both their own development in puberty and the things that they came across. The question was, how early is it? And the statistical data that I get is, for a guy, the first time they're exposed to porn is 9 to 10. It doesn't shock me at all. With as much as they have online presence, and parents without any sort of sense of being like, well, of course they're not looking at that. Ooh, don't say that. So here's the question. Who gets to set their initial reaction to that stuff? I want to be the first one out of the gate. That's what I kept telling Ginger. I'm giving you my argument. She was like, yes, but I don't want to set something in front of them that it becomes an enticement to be like, oh, I never knew that was possible. Oh, let me go investigate it. See what I'm saying? So we never settled the argument, but it did lead to us trying to have very forthcoming discussions. Because my number one instinct was, I want to be the one who sets the expectation, not that junior high kid in the locker room. I mean, it's not just that they say mean, angry, hateful stuff. It's they say incredibly wrong things. Things are just not true. That's where I learned all of my sort of facts of life, is in the locker room. And that was bad. And so there's a sense in which if Anna Grace and Caroline can confide in a youth leader, and Ainsley is this way, I can tell that they adore her. They look up to her because she's very funny and active, and she's invested in their lives. She picks them up and takes them to youth group. I hope they confide in her. Wow, that's so interesting. Somebody else had a question. Hand up over here. Yeah.
Well, I had a comment about that.
Excellent.
As a dad, I play man-to-man with my child. If she says something disrespectful to her, I'm going to say, no, you don't talk to your grandmother like that. That's enough. That's going to be right there on the spot immediately. As a youth leader, if a student comes to me and says, I'm so pissed at my grandmother, I'm going to let them run. I'm going to play zone. I'm going to give them more of the time to work that out. That doesn't mean I necessarily agree that they're correct, but they need to be able to process it, verbalize it, say it. But I'm still there, but I'm giving them more work. And at some point, I might be able to challenge what they're saying and say, now that you've talked through all this and you've sworn at them and you've been through all this stuff, is that what you really think? Because my job is to always point them to Christ and always point them back to it.
I like it. Zone versus man-to-man. That works for me. That works. Yeah, back there in the red.
So the next question really was from the family who asked, women that found for instance, when I asked him, if you were a superhero, what would your superpower be?
Yeah, sure.
Learning from that, there's a desire for them to be powerful because that's the pendulum swing from the powerless.
Yeah.
Desire to be strong because of weak. You're kind of seeing that as a...
Yeah. I really love that. Like I think, and what I want you to pick up from that is, and tell me your name again? Mitch. Mitch is starting to develop a set of go-to questions that he knows that he can get away with. I mean, somebody may look and kind of be like, I feel kind of weird about a superhero question. But there's some other way in which you could phrase something like that that got that person talking. Part of your skill ongoing is to have a sort of side sack of these questions that you can pull out at any given time to draw somebody out. But it's to the end of making sure that we honor the diversity within this person. Joey? Sure. The process of evaluating it, or the action plan? I think that one of the best, we had a big talk about this among the second years this last hour. There is no more ambiguous job description than being a youth minister. Just own it. Could you go reach the youth? Oh, sure. I mean, I've got half an hour this evening. I can do that. What does it mean to do that job? And so there's a sense in which part of my goal when I'm working through especially the avenues of ministry, and I don't know if we've had the avenues yet, large group, small group, one-on-ones, you've gotten a little bit of that idea. That's coming more as we get to it. When you are strategizing for a semester, part of that strategizing should have to do with ministry paths you want to take students along. And again, that ministry path does not mean, well, don't I want all of them to be mature Christians? Well, yeah, that's like the big sort of thing. But I'm talking to a level of specificity. I know there's something going on with Neil. I know something's going on with Neil. Because Neil has had a lot of things going on in his life. Neil's brother committed suicide last year. This is a 25-year-old illustration. I'll never forget this event. Neil, his brother committed suicide a year before he had plugged into our youth group. His big sister had made an attempt on her life, and his parents had divorced in the face of the oldest child's suicide. Happens all the time. You have tragedy in the family, parents divorce because they can't come to the same page on it. Okay, you ain't got to be Sigmund Freud to know that Neil's got something to talk about. All right? But this was his persona. This was the way he chose to make life work for him. Everything's great. No, it's fine. Yeah, it was kind of sad, but I'm okay. I mean, big smile on his face. And you're going, again, I'm no counselor, but that seems like inappropriate emotion to that experience. And I'm telling you, for an entire semester, the goal that I discussed with my youth director as I was the sort of intern was, how do we get Neil to crack? I mean, this has got to come out. He's got to at least admit that he's in need. The oddest thing, and this is not germane necessarily to the thing, we went one night and on the way home, he lived like a mile from my house, and so I would always give him a ride home back when people weren't creeped out by people giving rides home, but bear with me. We stopped by Baskin Robbins, the ice cream store. You have Baskin Robbins? Okay. And right there, Balmoral, and whatever that, Quince and Ridgeway. And I was like, get whatever you want, Neil. He goes, that sundae sure looks good. And I was like, get the sundae. So we got it, 3 scoops, whipped cream, everything, big spoon. I mean, his eyes are about to pop out, Well, he gets in the car, and I kind of got a cone that I'm licking on while I'm driving, and he's just pounding this thing. And suddenly, as he was talking, eating, and he just couldn't stop eating, and he was like, yeah, honestly, the truth is, you asked me about my brother, and it was really sad. It's the worst thing that ever happened. He starts crying. And literally, he's just... The more he scoops the ice cream in, the more stuff is coming out. And I was like, yes. I said, but tell me about that. What did you think of that? Well, I came home and my parents told me and I haven't been able to sleep and It's just all coming out of this sort of deal. Well, I learned later on after I went to seminary that there's a concept that's called transference. That when there's something so emotionally tumultuous going on inside someone, oftentimes you can't go at it directly. You got to give them something to transfer their anxiety into so that they can get around it to tell you. Isn't that weird? I think that actually this is what cutting is. Cutting is not a suicide attempt. Cutting is, this is so tumultuous, I need something that's real. And that hurts. That's real. Does that make sense? So there was a sense in which with Neil, in this little event, we knew that we had to crack the nut of Neil's life. But it was through this experience of, ice cream that sort of led us into that. All that's to say is, I hope that at the beginning of each semester, since we kind of work on that thing, that you have a list of your people. Maybe not everybody. If you got 200 people come to your youth group, then good luck with that. But there's a set of people that you know that you're close to, that you can have an impact on. When you're building these things together, we hope that there's some kind of action plan. And by the way, it may be that your only action plan is doggone it, I'm going to let that person know I'm a normal person. And my action plan to be able to deal with their life is just to take them bowling and not to talk about anything spiritual there. Because I know they expect me to. Because that's an elder's kid. And they expect me to come in and be the one that asks the religious question. I'm going to convince them that they can trust me. You see what I'm saying? That's a plan. So there's a sense in which I don't necessarily have a problem with somebody coming up with a plan and saying, I want to try this. There's wisdom in that I can compare with other people, just as long as you have an idea. I think the real messiness of ministry is getting to the end of the semester and being like, I feel like I ran around and put out fires the entire time, but I didn't put anything into action. I'm awfully busy. I'm exhausted. My family hates me. Does that mean that's progress? Good. So is that a non-answer to your question as well? But there's other training that comes on that. Yeah, last thing, I'm going to finish up here.
I was going to ask one more cautionary. That's not necessarily for you to do with every single student.
Depending on how big your youth group is. Yeah.
But maybe encouraging your volunteers to do the same with some of them.
A lot of that is training for that's exactly right. I may look and say, you know what, that group over there has got a much more natural interaction with this person. And I want to see that person. My goal for my staff is to get them, by the end of the semester, to feel like they've developed some kind of connection with those people. Sure, use your staff in the exact same way. What that does is it gives you some kind of tangibility to what you're doing. Let me race through these last two, not because they're unimportant, but because we wanted to camp out on that one. The fourth of our presuppositions is the learning process. Look, this is simply a way of saying people come to own information in different ways. We've acknowledged that diversity, but we also know that there's a variety of ways in which we need to get that information across. And we use this little acronym. Is this an acronym? TDOEE. T. The T is what you enjoy the most. That's probably why you went into ministry. Teaching. There's data. There's information to put out there. But the problem is the information, that's not always the way people adopt things. That's not always the way people come to own that information. D stands for demonstrate. The learning process presupposition says that when you are seeking to get information across to your students, they have to see you in action. Let's honor the ministry of Young Life for this. I've got some critique here and there of Young Life, but this they got right. If you're going to the grocery store, take a student. If you're running an errand to the town next to you, take a student. In other words, let them have an access to your life that is important. I know you're saying, I don't put kids in the car with me because I got road rage and I don't want them to see that. Well, you know what? They may need to see that because they may need to know that you're a human being who screams at people in traffic and has an anger issue. Or they may need to come over to your home when you're trying to get the kids to bed and you're saying all kinds of horrible things to get the kids to bed, right? Would you like one of these children? Would you take it away from me and I'll never see it ever again? Maybe? Sorry. I had a girl with postpartum. I had a former student, intern, or a campus minister's wife who kind of had a postpartum thing. And she said, I knew I had a problem when I thought to myself one day, if someone came and said, I'll take that child from you and you'll never see it again, I would have been like, here you go. And see, all of you are sitting back there going, oh, why, that's horrible. Well, you know what? That's because you don't understand what the sin issue is. And when that came up out of her, she didn't know what to do. So that was the deal. Guess what? Students need to see you in those contexts. And they need to see you demonstrating godliness as well. O, observe. It means we got to watch. That's why we go to the lunchroom. We don't go to the lunchroom for self-embarrassment issues, which it's certainly plenty of that. We go there so we can see them in their context, to observe them. It's fun for me to stand on the outside and watch my girls interact with other people, because I see a side of them that I don't get to see. That's normal. That's why I want them to be an adult, so they leave. That's why we're raising them, right? To leave, to get out, so I can have your mother back, right? E and E is evaluate and encourage. And by the way, according to Mark Lowry, it has to be of that order. Evaluate. I've got to give feedback to someone. The way in which someone comes across in the learning process is that you tell them how they come across. I used to love sitting with students and being able to say, you know what, you don't seem like the kind of person who would, I don't know, overreact to something, because you seem kind of like you're more low-key than that. So it was really weird how often someone, as soon as I said, you don't seem like the kind of person, they would kind of went, it was like, is he about to say this? Is he about to tell me about me? Look, what a powerful witness into that person's life that you bring to say, I see you, we receive you as this. And having it be something that's not always negative. You know, the loudmouth kid, we had a loudmouth kid in our junior high Sunday night fellowship. And I mean loudmouth, I mean, he's that guy. I mean, he's like an ADHD poster child. He cannot not say whatever's coming through his head. But I made it my determination that I wasn't going to tell him what every single person had told him. You're the bad kid. And I think Cole and me are friends now. I really do. Of course, as soon as I say that, this Sunday he'll be the devil. But then we encourage. Don't evaluate without encouraging. Look at them and bring them along. They learn process because you affirmed them. They learn things in the process because you told them that you were proud of them. Oof. A youth director looks at it and says they're proud of you. It's what my youth director did for me. He was great. Last one, we'll finish with this. Demographics. I'm going to name drop in this story. It's always fun to do this. I went to New York City 2 weeks ago. RUF is holding a great big fundraiser. And we guilt manipulated Tim Keller into coming to our fundraiser. His son works for us in Metro New York, and so we played that card shamelessly. And so he acquiesced. Anyway. So he shows up, and last summer, Keller had dropped this really complimentary line about Reformed University Fellowship, RUF, I work for. And so I was determined to get that piece of audio that had come on this tape that we had on video. It's one of the main reasons why I wanted to be in New York a couple weeks ago. So he shows up at this big party, and there's all these things, and dinner and supporters and whatnot. And we're at Central Presbyterian Church in the Upper East Side, 62nd and Park. And that's where we had the event. And so I looked at him and I was like Tim, his friends called him Tim. I had it written out what he said. Somebody sent me an email with a quote. I said, you said this with Ligon and that thing. I give you $5 if you'll put it on camera for me. He was like, sure, where do you want to go? I was like, well, is there a place in this room? He goes, actually, there's a room downstairs. Come on, I want to show it to you. So we go downstairs 2 flights of steps to this little office building. It opens up and we walk in, and the entire walls, you can see the video, I'll tell you where it is. The walls are covered in these pictures, like these, what do you call it? The headshots of Broadway artists from like forever ago. And he goes, yeah, this is called the something something room, where the something girls used to meet. And I was like, the what? He goes, yeah. He goes, there was a group of Broadway actresses who used to get together and just kind of have this little society meeting. And he said, well, you know, Barbara Stanwyck was something something girl. And of course, I feel like such an idiot. I'm trying to set up a camera, and I was like, you know, I used to watch The Big Valley when I was a kid. Man, nobody knows who Barbara Stanwyck is. Does anybody know what Big Valley is? Lee Majors? Who else was in The Big Valley? Thank you, Tally, for heaven's sakes. It was, trust me, that is a really funny story. What I just told right there was hilariously funny, because if you knew what the Big Valley was, anyway, it'll come to you later. So anyway, so he starts telling me about this room. And I'm telling you, it's no bigger than this little wall right here out to where I am. And he's telling me what the people used to run, and Barbara Stanwyck goes there. And I was just kind of like, huh, wow, go figure. So I went and told somebody this story at the party, and they said, yeah, you know that Tim Keller is like, when he quits writing religious books, could easily write a history of New York. Because in the guy's free time in the last 25 years or so that he's been there, all he does is he'll pick up a book about a certain neighborhood in New York in a certain time period. And then he'll spend his weekend kind of wandering the streets up and down where that thing happened, just trying to kind of get the feel. Sometimes I'll sit and interview people that are there. Well, the amount of knowledge that he's amassed about his context is crazy. Well, I wonder why he's had the success that he's had. Because he knows his demographic. You are to be a student of your context. You need to know the percentage of males and females at your local big high school. You need to know how many National Merit Scholars they had last year. You need to know whether or not the academic programs are respected by the rest of the state. You need to know what their parent breakdown is. You need to know how many youth were involved last year. You need to have a conversation with the previous youth director from your church. Doesn't matter that he got run out on a rail. You need to call him and ask them about it. You are to be a student of your demographic, to know as much as you possibly can about this little corner of the world that God's called me to serve in. Somewhere in there, the demographic question will shape and will influence the decisions you make in ministry. It will pattern your language. It'll change the illustrations that you use with your students. It'll make you, it'll introduce you into their pop culture world. Obviously, there's an in the world but not of the world thing there, but I at least need to know. Did anybody watch the Grammys Sunday night? I am so entertained by the Grammys, and no one watches the Grammys. Huh? Taylor was awesome. She did a great job. Her friends call her Taylor. We love Taylor. Tay-Tay. My girls call her Tay-Tay. Tay-Tay. I think that's funny. It is funny. It's objectively funny. All right, any last question, thoughts? The presuppositions are the way in which we keep from abusing people in ministry. It's our posture. It's our mode of ministry. And it fits in with our philosophy in a very vivid way, as you can tell. Any other thoughts or questions about this material that we've covered? You remember in college when you used to say, if there are no other questions, then we'll go ahead and dismiss. And you never wanted to be that person that was like, I've got one more question. That's always a way to kill it, to tell people that they'll let out if you don't have any more questions. Anyway, I'll be here for another few minutes afterwards. Welcome to that. Let me pray for us, and we'll wrap up. What's after this, Joey, as far as the schedule is concerned? Worship is right after this, so see you around for that. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, give us grace then to apply, to mull over. Father, our imaginations right now are churning with ideas of evaluation, thinking through how we did the things that we did. We're asking questions about our posture towards our students. If you would give us the insight of the Holy Spirit, we would say we would desperately need it. We need for you to give us insight into ourselves so that we can be more effective, so we can reach more people, so that we can grow our group both numerically and spiritually. We long to see your church filled, to gather in your elect. We thank you that you've called us to do it, and we pray that we would take joy in participating in it. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.